Good afternoon and good evening, everyone. And thank you for joining us for How to Launch with Vineeta Malhotra. My name is Colin Mahan, and I'm a program manager at the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. For those of you who may not know, the NASDAQ Center is a nonprofit dedicated to enabling entrepreneurs from all over the world to realize their maximum potentials and grow. As you may have just seen in the chat, the NASDAQ Center, along with our partner Mentor Cloud, launched a free mentor matching platform for entrepreneurs called Mentor Makers. Create your own advisory board to guide and inspire you with in-the-moment mentorship from topic experts and professionals dedicated to providing exceptional mentorship to entrepreneurs across all races, industries, and geographies. So find or become a mentor today by using the link in the chat. We know mentorship matters to all entrepreneurs. Their success is dependent on it. Quick housekeeping item, we're going to open up for live Q&A at the end of the event, so please submit your questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen throughout the presentation. Again, none of what we do here could be possible without all the amazing support from our sponsors, including NASDAQ, Lehigh University, Bank of the West, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, Woodruff Sawyer, BPM, and NZTE. We're humbled by their contributions and their continuous support. During these still somewhat unique times, we're curious on how sentiment is among the entrepreneurs we work with. So we're going to start by taking a poll, letting us know how you're doing. How are you feeling? And what's keeping you up at night? These questions not only help us know how our entrepreneurs out there in the digital community are doing, but also they help us understand what topics we should be hosting in the future. So take a moment and vote. I'm going to not keep this up too long because I want to dive into our discussion today, but I do want to give you a chance to let us know where you're at. All right, looks like optimism is in the lead, but totally understand that there is some anxiety and survival mode people out there. So I'm going to end this poll, share those results. So optimism, as I mentioned, is at the top of the key, but totally understand that just surviving and there's a little bit of anxiety out there. Hopefully our discussion today will help alleviate some of those feelings. What's keeping you up is finance. So totally understand, with a good mix of sales and marketing. Well, we're going to get into some of those pain points today with our discussion. So without any further delay, please join me in giving a warm welcome to our special guest, Vineeta Malhotra. She's a product and go-to-market specialist. She's currently at Uber Eats and previously at Spotify. Welcome, Vineeta.
Thanks, Colin. Thanks for having me. Super excited to be here today.
Well, thank you for giving some of your expertise to the entrepreneurs who are attending today who are looking to learn how to launch. So I'm going to dive right in.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
You've launched several products for some pretty big names. What are some of the first steps when preparing to go to market?
Yeah, so I have worked in a B2B capacity mostly at my experience with Uber Eats and previously at Spotify. And so very well versed on the B2B audience. But I think for any product, taking a step back before the launch process, I wanted to talk a little bit about the planning process. I think most folks tend to skim over that a little bit, but it is just as important as how you launch. And so I think really defining the problem space is where I begin. What is the problem I'm trying to solve? Who is my target audience? And what am I looking to really accomplish with this product or feature that I'm releasing? And once I've defined that, I can define what the MVP requirements are. And that really helps shape where this product is going to go. What does good enough look like to even release it to the market? And so I basically start with that thought process is, where do I think I'm ready to release a product? And am I satisfied with where it is at the moment? Once I've done that, I make sure I've kind of captured any local regulations, sign-offs that are needed, and that the entire business should be aligned on what that scope is before I get more into the tacticals. I tend to create a very robust go-to-market tracker with all of my to-dos, sign-offs, steps that are needed to kind of complete a product launch, and that keeps me organized as well, and make sure that I have a very functioning product before I release anything into the wild. So those are kind of my initial thought process before I even dive into all of the tacticals.
I love that. Yeah. knowing that understanding the problems that users are having and solving them, I think is a great first step. And also, this may go without saying, but hoping that they'll put money behind solving that problem.
Yeah, absolutely. You definitely need a little bit there to kind of get going on building something.
So talking about, validation of whether or not people are actually willing to pay, how can founders easily validate their offering even before building?
Yeah, I think everything starts with data. There's a lot of data out there that you can kind of do your own research, do your competitive landscaping. What does the market really need right now? And is there a gap in the market that you can easily fill with your product? I like to make sure that the data backs up all of my hypotheses. You might have multiple hypotheses, but I think you can do a lot of digging on the internet to make sure that you're actually identifying a problem area that is in high demand. And I like to also run research groups. I'm going to say this time and time again, but running research groups and capturing the voice of customer is so key throughout the product launch experience that it is really going to shape the way that you build your roadmap and the way that you actually take something out to market. So running research groups for me is a great way to kind of gut check your validations and your hypotheses to make sure that people understand what you're building, that they understand the space that you're playing in, and that your solution actually hits home for them. So I tend to run many focus groups in this area. And I finally like to do prototyping. I think there is a lightweight way that you can build a prototype. It doesn't have to be a functioning product. It can be an interactive design module. It could be, design concepts that you present to your research groups. But having something that folks can react to and interact with really helps you validate, like, hey, am I on the right direction or not? Does this make sense? Is it a good way for me to bring this out to market? So I think those pieces are really important in shaping the narrative that you're trying to place in market. And once you've got that beta prototype going with a small group, you can even test it for a certain time period to make sure that you're actually seeing success. So I think those are some of the things that I would recommend when you validate in the market, things that have definitely worked for me really well.
Amazing. That's super helpful. And Vineeta, many founders have asked us on what's the best way to formulate these research groups, right? And I think from what I've seen, and I'd love to hear a little bit more from your perspective on this, is if you aren't selling the offering to somebody yet, they are happy to talk to you about the problem space in the B2B world.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you reach out to initially formulate these research groups?
Yeah, I think once you have your target audience defined, you can proactively go after them and identify them. And like you said, if something is free and people see some kind of benefit in it and are willing to talk to you, you should take that opportunity. So the way that we've done it in the B2B space and the way that I've reached out is, hey, I think this person would really value from this product that I'm rolling out, and I would like to prove to them what their value is. So I will start by presenting what exactly the product is and what they will get out of it. And I think that's the best way to gain buy-in from any audience that's working on your product or initiative, whether it's the end customer or business leadership, or anyone that you need to kind of get aligned on the same path, is what's in it for them. That's really what motivates people, right? And so you provide that kind of value to your, target audience, your research groups. You can pull them in by offering them, hey, like, I'll let you try this early prototype if you give me 30 minutes of your time back. And that's typically what I've done, is a very structured feedback loop. I think oftentimes people, wonder how they're going to interact with a product, what they're going to get out of it, how much time they need to dedicate, do they need to pay you? If you provide a lot of structure up front, and even if you have a little bit of budget, a little bit of an incentive, it's really helped go a long way because both parties are getting something out of it.
Love that. And then the customer discovery phase, people like appearing to be smart, for lack of a better term. So if you're saying, I've heard advice like, I'm working on a project that may be in your space, love to hear your thoughts around this problem. So you're like actually not trying to initiate the sale just yet, but people are always happy to give 15 on. Tell me about how your inbox is as a VC, right? Like, because I'm sure they have tons of complaints that would be valuable customer data points.
Yeah, and I think that's another thing is sometimes people just want an avenue to vent. And so I kind of noticed that creating a forum for them to air out their pain points, tell you what they want. If they could wave a magic wand and have you build them something, what would the ideal state look like? People love to express that. They love to tell you what they want you to build them. So I think if you give them that avenue and initiative to do so, they'll be more than willing to. And I think use your networks, right? Like I think a lot of us have larger networks than we think, whether it's through our social media or LinkedIn, emails, even online forums where you can reach out for volunteers. There's always an audience somewhere.
Awesome. You mentioned assessing your competitive landscape in one of your last points. So how do you suggest founders assess their competitive landscapes, and what are some tools that you've used to take a look at the data there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this piece is very important to the way that you position yourself in the market. And what I like to do, and I'll probably get very tactical here, because I just feel so strongly about how you position yourself on a value proposition scale, is lay out all your competitors, anyone and everyone who plays in this space, right? And kind of outline exactly what they're bringing to the table. What is their value proposition? What is their hero statement? What feature set are they offering down to the very specifics? And once you can kind of define that, it'll help you plot them almost on a scale of here's where I'm trying to be with my product. It's between, x-axis and y-axis. You plot every other competitor on the scale and you start to see a pattern emerge, which is there's a huge gap in, the top right quadrant. And this is where I think I can plug in because there's clearly nothing else happening or no other competitor that offers this same level of, skill or this same feature set that I want to launch with. I'm a very visual person as well. And so I think this kind of really helps me put into perspective how the competitive landscape is looking, how competitors are pricing, and where exactly my product falls onto that scale. I think those are tools that have really helped me identify where the market opportunity is and how do I actually stay one step ahead.
I love that. And then, so once you've validated your offering, hopefully with more than people than your friends and your mom, because they love you, and you've got a product, developing the right value prop is super key. So how can you easily understand if the value prop is sticking? And if it isn't, how fast should you iterate it?
Yeah, so this is something I've faced many times throughout my launch process. You spend so much time crafting a value prop. You spend, hours wording the right hero statement. You spend hours putting together your 3 value propositions because that's the magic number that everyone tends to remember, right? And so you spend a lot of time on this and do a lot of market research and realize that you may have to iterate. And this is what I've noticed many times is that it's not necessarily that the product isn't sticking. It's actually just that people don't understand what the product is or what you're trying to offer them. And I think so there's good and bad there. The good is that it's not your product, it's your messaging. And the bad is that you have to redo your messaging. And I've definitely been in the drawing room many times, brainstorming, whiteboarding with our designers on how we can simplify and streamline the value proposition. And for me, what that really means is how can I communicate what the product is and what I'm providing, as a service to people, and can they understand it in less than 3 minutes? And does it require a lot of explanation? Does it require context setting, or can they glean it quickly, whether that's from marketing materials or a social media post, an advertisement? And so I really try to use that as my kind of guiding principle. If I show this to a brand new person who's never been exposed to this, can I communicate this in less than 3 minutes? And you tend to see some trends there. You might try to ask your, research group or your network of folks, hey, what exactly do you think this is? What is your key takeaway when I present this? And when they give you keywords, you kind of notice trends and patterns on, hey, if everyone's saying cheap, it's really cheap, or it's really, really fast. You can kind of see that, okay, here's a perception of what it is. Do I like the perception? Is this actually what I'm trying to communicate? Or do I need to reword my whole statement? Reword my value propositions, communicate more clearly in a way that changes this perception. So I think you definitely have to go to the drawing board a few times sometimes. I've had to do it 3 or 4 times throughout the life cycle of a product. And I think that's okay. There's, nothing wrong with trial and error. In fact, I think that's definitely one of the guiding principles of launching a product is you may have to do it a few different times in different ways to actually get it to stick. But I try to do it in different between the stages of the development and the rollout process. So you take a small cohort, roll out the product, see if it hits, and if not, before you launch your next market or your next set of users, you can iterate and A/B test almost on your messaging.
Yeah, too often I hear entrepreneurs, because I think a lot of entrepreneurs pitch VCs constantly, who want to hear all of many of the details of the business model, problem, market size, but value prop is not that tool, right? It's the hook. Then you can tell them all the details, all the time and money you're saving them, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we tend to kind of overthink it sometimes. And that's something I've noticed too, by throwing in buzzwords and throwing in, phrases that sound nice, but they don't actually mean anything. And what I've noticed, especially with the B2B audience, is they just want to hear what they're getting from you. They want to hear very clearly what's in it for them because, everyone's busy running a business and they don't have time to read between the lines and they don't have time to read your fine print. They just want to know very clearly what exactly you're offering them. So something that I've definitely taken as a learning.
So you're suggesting that innovative, disruptive, machine learning, you like those words?
Right, buzzwords, exactly. What does innovative actually mean?
Yeah, I mean, you're bringing something new to market either way, whatever it is, right? Even if it's a sandwich, I could just tell you have an innovative sandwich idea, right?
Exactly.
But it
Exactly.
wouldn't mean
Tell me
anything.
what's in the sandwich.
Yeah, but it wouldn't mean anything to you if you were hungry, right?
Yep. There you go.
I don't know if it'll make me full and I'll like it. Not if I, how cool.
Absolutely.
Or if it's upside down grilled cheese, something like that. Anyhow, I digress. So from value prop to, you mentioned that a lot of customers, you'll lean in when they say cheap or expensive or fast. So pricing is also a big part of launch and is typically a hurdle for entrepreneurs. So how do entrepreneurs quickly understand what customers are willing to pay?
Yeah, this is something I've had to iterate on many times as well throughout the launch process. What I think really helps and works for me is identifying every single pricing scenario that can come out to be. So first you have to do your due diligence, right? Like what are your operating costs? What's your all-in cost? And what's the bottom line that you're looking for? And you can kind of price out different scenarios based on all of your inputs. Here's a best case scenario. I'm going to make, $20 on this product at the end of the day and take that home. Here's where I break even. And here's the worst case. How much am I accepting to price at a loss in order to actually get this out to market? And what I found is playing around with different pricing scenarios has really helped me at least frame my understanding and my perception of where mentally I think I'm going to take this out to market and what I'm willing to experiment with. And I think experimentation here is also very key. Don't be afraid to A/B test here as well. There are products where I've launched in one city with a certain set of pricing, another city with another set of pricing. You might have one client that you offer tiered pricing for, another client that you offer flat pricing for. So don't be afraid to play around with different combinations based on your scenarios because you already kind of established your appetite for risk there. You've already kind of established your baseline pricing metrics. And so you should be essentially comfortable with anything that falls in between that range. So what I found is really taking it out to market with a smaller group of users first and seeing how they react, what is their willingness to pay for it. And then you can also benchmark on competition. I think this is another one that I find has been really helpful is what are competitors charging for it? And do I think my product is superior? Hopefully, yes. Am I willing to price at a premium based on that? Or do I actually want to price at industry standard to make sure that I can hook people in, grow product adoption before I start, pricing a little bit higher if I truly keep on building onto it.
That's super helpful. And also you mentioned the research groups earlier. I think one of our pricing experts has mentioned that, in the customer discovery phase, when you're just understanding the problem set, like asking them, among all the other questions about the problem that they're attempting to solve using different products or services, is what, not like, here's my pricing strategy, but like, how much are you willing to pay to solve this problem is a good thing to do in the early days too.
Yeah, I think if you provide ranges, especially, people are more visual learners. And so I think if you present them with some options, some scenarios, even, I think where you actually have them walk through a simulation, and ask them to put in a number, for example, I think that can go a long way too. I've seen that be very helpful because you'd be surprised at the ranges of answers that you get until you actually ask them to walk through a real life scenario, and the numbers are completely different than what they would put in, say, a survey. So I found that very interesting too.
Yeah, and I think if you ask the majority of Americans if they'd pay $15 for avocado toast in the early days, they'd say no, but guess who's doing it all day long?
Exactly. All those brunch fanatics.
Yep. So, I think a lot of the launch is getting buzz around the product or service. So how much emphasis would you place on media and PR when launching? And also with the new digital era we live in, are there other areas that founders can focus in on?
Yeah, I think media and PR still plays a large role in gathering kind of a lot of momentum behind a launch. And it feels more traditional, I think, now because we live in such a digital age, but I think it still holds a lot of weight in capturing the attention of, picking up news articles, whether it's TechCrunch or, any forums that are being posted about LinkedIn, et cetera. I think they still pick up a majority of news streams. So I would agree that media and PR are still very key to the strategy and getting something out at scale. However, I tend to reserve media and PR for a later stage of a launch when I know that my product is at more than MVP level. So I wouldn't do it for an initial launch myself. I would tend to use my networks and use more of a social media approach for early stage launches. So whether that's, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, you have different forums. I even tend to scour Reddit forums when I launch things, especially because, the companies that I've worked at are so consumer facing that people will write about their experiences on these forums, and you can kind of pick up what their honest reactions are and keep on iterating from there. But I would use all of those forums to actually get your word out about your project early on. If you have a little budget, experiential events have gone a long way. We had done a lot of those at Spotify to capture buzz exactly like that. When you invite a cohort of customers to come and try your product or service live themselves, that tends to go a long way as well. I think targeted ads goes a long way too. I really think that capturing buzz is all about capturing the user at the right moment in their day. And you should really look for those moments when they would actually use your product or service, right? So is it something that when they wake up, it's the first thought that they need, maybe that's a push to their phone on a targeted ad? Is it something that when they're walking by, a coffee shop, they'd actually want to say like, hey, I could really use one of those. And maybe you work with your local partnerships around the neighborhood to do some, in-store advertising. So it's really about capturing them when they need it most. And how do you actually do that? It may not necessarily be the news, but many other channels to do so.
Wow, that's a great point. And first thing in the morning is when most emails get deleted from my inbox that aren't.
So don't send you an email first thing in the morning, basically.
Unless I need it, I'll answer yours. Again, if somebody's trying to sell me cybersecurity first thing I wake up in the morning, I'm not gonna respond to it.
Yeah, exactly.
First thing I wake up thinking about. So now moving a little bit further into the journey, like customer feedback is going to be really, really important in the early days. And so what are some ways founders can effectively collect this information? And our buddy Steve, who's in attendance, said, how do solo founders find research groups? So I think it's a little bit tied together.
Yeah, as I mentioned, I think using your network is really important here. Send out a blast on your network socials, use your community organizations, use your workplace, your friends who are in workplaces. I've had people reach out to me from previous jobs that I haven't talked to in 7-8 years with a random email to take a survey. And I've been happily willing to take that survey because, I've been entered for a raffle or something. So incentives go a long way. Using your networks go a long way. But I think in general, when you're reaching out for customer feedback, kind of forming those alpha and beta groups to help take your product for a spin early on and getting that feedback loop, as I talked about early on, is super important. So structured format, set expectations early on. I'll need 30 minutes of your time. You'll be expected to do XYZ tasks. You might be asked to record your experience, take a survey while you're, using my product or service. I might, come and shadow you while you're doing that. So there are a lot of different avenues for you to get that firsthand experience, but reaching out to your networks and kind of pulling people who may, benefit somewhat from your product, or even taking a second to provide some feedback to you, goes a long way to actually shape your roadmap. And that can be an identified audience, or, to Steve's question, it could be a random audience where you send out a survey and you ask for anyone's time if people are willing to give it.
It's great advice. And I think, while you're getting that feedback, I'm sure you've had to deal with this, but how do you go about managing and fixing bugs or issues while still focusing on growth?
Yeah. So when I first joined and started working in a product capacity, I kept on hearing two main words. It was prioritization and trade-offs. And I was like, man, everyone just loves throwing these words around. And I mean, here I am almost 2 years later, and I think that they are actually the guiding principles for what helps you build a strong product, because it really does come down to prioritization. It really comes down to when you have a bug that's presented to you, or a feature request, for example, or an issue, how does it actually trade off against what you have on your current roadmap or what you're intending to build? How does it ladder up to the OKRs that you've defined in the beginning of your product? Do you want to grow adoption? Do you want to grow scale? Do you want to capture the most number of users, or do you want to actually capture a small number of users but present the best product to market? You can kind of categorize how those bugs ladder up to your OKRs. And if that's a trade-off that you're willing to make, then you need to be able to say, hey, I'm going to swap out my next feature that I'm building in order to fix this bug. So it really is about weighing which one you want to tackle first, and which one do you think actually helps you move closer towards your goals. And so that's something that I, do on a daily basis, multiple times a day. Because when you're building a product, you're always going to have bugs. You're always going to have issues. You're always going to have people saying, hey, I would really love for you to build this or that, feature requests incoming. So it's really about how you actually make those prioritization trade-offs and how you actually pin them up against each other. And another thing that's really helped for me is building that buffer into your build schedule and your roadmap and your sprints. What I try to do is save about 20% capacity to actually address those ongoing items, so that you're still majority working towards your goals. Say it's growth, you have your big rocks and objectives that you're trying to meet, but you have a little bit of buffer space that you can intake some bugs and work them in as part of your process, so that you're constantly fixing things as you keep on marching towards your goal. I think that's really helped. I also think setting clear expectations with users. People kind of just want to hear when you're fixing something, right? They want to hear that they were acknowledged and that you've taken their feedback to heart, and that you have a path towards resolution. And so sometimes it's not about the fact that you can't get to it immediately. It's saying like, hey, I'm going to address that in 6 months. And I hope you keep on using this because we're building XYZ really cool things. And I will make sure to get to your project in the next 6 months. So sometimes it's just setting clear expectations of people.
I love your prioritization point, because many times it's like, I've heard that founders can get feature set to death, right? Where they hear a bunch of requests for a bunch of things that not their entire product market fit roadmap would actually need. And so like one person would ask for all these shiny things that not the general population of the people you should be selling to.
Yeah. And I think that's an interesting, you can kind of fall down that trap of where you build for one specific partner or customer, and you keep on going deeper and deeper down that rabbit hole. And now you've created this amazing product that only one person or one, customer segment can use. And you've got this really great product, but not enough of an audience to actually use it because you've gone so far deep down. So I think this kind of goes back to tying, when you're doing your market research and defining your target audience and your MVP, you have to define your goals, right? And so if this doesn't ladder up to your goals, you can kind of bucket things into what is truly a launch blocker, aka if this thing doesn't work, I can't take this out to market, versus what is a nice to have. So these are things that I can fast follow with after a launch. I think kind of using that mental model and bucketing them into these two different categories really helps too, in saying, this is something I can get to later, and this is something that I absolutely have to work on now.
Yeah, I love that. We've had mentors say, you're looking for Mr. or Mrs. Right now, not Mr. or Mrs. Right.
Hmm.
The things that they're asking for may be on your roadmap, but you need right now revenue in the bank.
Yep, exactly. Long-term versus short-term.
Totally. So speaking of money in the bank, many founders in our community have tight budgets in the early stages. So what are some ways you suggest they save time and money when launching?
Yeah, I think I touched upon two of these earlier. One is early testers using your networks to actually get feedback and voice of customer early and often. The second is prototyping on a low budget. There are a lot of tools out there that help you build something that's semi-functional that can help you kind of test market reaction. The third that I don't think I've talked about yet is partnerships and collaborations, something that really worked well at Spotify too. We did a lot of brand collaboration when we took things out to market. And that really helps because you're doubling your network. You are doubling your reach, you're expanding your audience, you're tapping into each other's networks. And I think that's something where it's a win-win situation for both parties, right? You're working together and you're both getting something out of it. You're both getting value out of it. So I would definitely stress partnerships and collaborations, especially when you're on a tight budget. Because like I said, people they want to know what's in it for them. And so if you're providing value to another organization and providing them something that you can offer them, whether it's even early access to your product, it is your skills or your team's skills, whatever it might be, whatever that value exchange might be, I think partnerships can go a really long way.
I love that. And also, one thing that you brought up is, when really thinking about the journey of saving time and money, identifying those partners, usually in your competitive market landscape, could be useful, right? But also adding complementary services, right? Like if you sell bicycles, who sells helmets that's bigger than you? I'm going to
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think identifying those adjacencies are really essential, because they might have been on your competitive landscape. You're right. They might be part of your, scatter plot somewhere, but that might be so far off of where you're trying to play that you might actually see a natural partnership there. And you might actually see an opportunity to work together as opposed to pin up against each other. So there's definitely value in saying, like, here's a service that I offer. I think what would be so great to sell as an add-on is, another item, for example. And so you might partner together with those types of words.
That's great. We get asked about this all the time. So what are some tools that you use to help launching and just your life easier?
Yes. I am a very visual learner. I also am, really particular about my checklists and crossing things off when I get them done. I think when you are working in a capacity like this, where you're launching products left and right, and you are working with so many cross-functional teams, as I'm sure everyone on this panel is also doing the same, you need something to keep you organized. So I work in spreadsheets a lot, which seems basic, but they are, let me tell you, they're color coded, they have checklists, they have pivot tables, they are very hyper organized. So I definitely rely on spreadsheets a lot. I use Jira for ongoing bug management, feature release management, feature request processes. So I really like Jira's ability to break things up into sprints and visualize them on sprints. So I use that quite a bit. And in terms of testing, I have used, for mobile app testing, I've used this tool called TestFlight. It's on iOS, and it allows you to release your, this is applicable for obviously a software, a mobile application-based software. You can release your software to a small group of testers on iOS using TestFlight. And that has been super helpful in kind of getting that smaller scale feedback. And I don't think many people actually know about TestFlight. So definitely check that out if you're building something. And then Android actually has a similar program, but it's for a beta program too. So very easy to actually let you get something out into the wild with very low lift.
I love that. And also there's a website that I heard about from one of our advisory board members who lets you see users interact with your website for free for 100 sessions. And it's called Hotjar. I believe it's still free for 100 users, but that one he had used for his website. And literally, if he moved his button from the bottom left to the top right, everyone clicked it, but nobody hit it when it was at the bottom. So that one's good for understanding where people are navigating and where they're dropping.
Oh, that's interesting. I'll have to check that out.
And you can delete your first 100 sessions when it tries to convert you to payment, and then do another 100.
Oh, I love it. Game the system.
Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned teams, and somebody, Emerald, says, "I love Hotjar." Great. Well, it still works then, I guess. But you mentioned teams, and effectively leading them through a launch. I mean, with the world still relatively in our homes, how do you lead teams through a launch? And as many have said, how do you build the plane while flying it?
Yeah, I think there's two work streams here. One is, especially in a remote world, one is kind of chugging along your business priorities, right? Like gathering buy-in, building the actual thing. The second is keeping up team morale. And when you're working in a product capacity, it's kind of on you to make sure that the team is feeling strong, that they're sold into your vision, and that everyone is excited about building the same thing together. So I'll talk a little bit about both. The first one on actually aligning towards your business goals, I would say starting off by gathering buy-in early and often, and keeping on reiterating the value of your product. Especially when you work in a big organization. For myself, it's really helped, but even when you're a small scale startup or a solo founder, I think getting other people excited about your vision is really important. How do you actually sell your product? You are the sole spokesperson for your product, right? So how you communicate it and how you talk about it and get people excited is what people are going to see and feel about it. So gather that buy-in early and often, and keep on reiterating the value. People want to know, again, what they're getting out of it, what's in it for them. And so you keep on telling that, and that might change from audience to audience, and that's okay. As long as you keep on telling people what they're going to benefit from. So that's something that's really helped in kind of corralling a cross-functional team towards one goal, painting that vision and keeping on working towards it. Another is celebrating the milestones. I think Colin, you and I actually talked about this. You have to celebrate the little wins sometimes, whether it's, releasing a small feature or fixing a bug that your, team has been heads down on for 3 weeks. You have to celebrate those wins and milestones with your teams to make sure that they are, keeping motivated and that everyone is still not losing sight of your vision. And in the same way, lead retros often. I think you learn a lot from every release or sprint or small launch that you go through. And so kind of keeping track of those. Okay, what did I do well? What did I not do well? What would I change differently? I think keeping track of those after every launch is super important too, because it all informs your larger strategy. Other tactics that I like to do are brainstorming often. I usually like to lead, Freebird whiteboard sessions. I think in a virtual world now we've done slides with stickies on it, rapid fire brainstorms, keyword brainstorms, pie in the sky, North Star visioning. So I think there's a lot of fun in doing those, even though you might have, a set plan for the next 2-3 months, 6 months, just to keep the creative juices flowing. And you never know when a new idea actually comes in where you might, slip it into your roadmap. So I think those things are really important. And then last thing I would say is keep prioritizing and be open to change. I think once the team kind of rallies around the fact that you stay agile and that, you might change direction or change course based on something you hear from voice of customer feedback, you should be able to kind of keep on marching towards the same goal. And then the second is I talked about employee, team morale, et cetera. And celebrating those wins kind of goes hand in hand, but carving out time to yourselves, especially when we're all virtual right now, scheduling check-ins, team happy hours, or time just for you to sit and de-stress, no meeting days, et cetera. Those really help too.
That's great. Gotta celebrate the wins. And you definitely mentioned this, and we're getting close to Q&A, but I want to run through these last couple with you. So if you guys have any questions based on what Vineeta said already or what your challenges are with the launch, please drop them in the Q&A function. But you mentioned measurement. And that's, I believe, is super important with anything that one does in business. So how do you suggest that founders measure the success of their launches, and what KPIs are really important in the early days?
Yeah. The way I like to define success are kind of in 3 tiers. So you have your hero metric. What is the exact metric you're trying to move? Is it number of users? Is it number of orders? Is it number of items sold? It might be one hero metric. Is it amount that you make, right? Is the bottom line. And then you have your primary metrics. And those are the kind of OKRs that you define at the very upfront planning stage of your product. So it might be adoption, right? What percent of the total addressable market is actually using your product? Is that something that you're tracking over time? Is it growing? Is it declining? That's something I would look at. First-time users versus repeat users, whether that's buying a service or using a service, that might be something you look at. And success rate. So what does actually success mean in terms of your product or service? Is it that from end to end it completes without a hitch? Is it that they purchase it and they keep on coming back for more? Success can be so different depending on what you're taking out to market, but what does that success metric actually look like, and how do you define it? And so those are kind of your primary metrics. And I would say when you're launching something early stages, the focus is not usually to make money right away. You're usually willing to take some kind of loss to get something out to market and prove a fit before you start becoming profitable on it. So I would say that as a secondary metric, is it profitable, and how much is it based on your bottom line, and how much are you actually taking home at the end of the day? I would say that those are the key metrics that I typically look for to define success, but they can vary so greatly based on what you're taking out to market. That those are typically the guiding principles.
No, Vineeta, that's it's an amazing framework for measurement, because as you covered, we often hear the finance number as the measurement success at the beginning, where it's like a revenue-based target versus like, is it engagement? Is it a certain amount of learnings throughout different touch points to the user's journey, right? Like, I think there's so many other things that founders can measure, like growth, retention, churn, that may be tied to revenue, but don't live in the CFO's inbox.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that kind of goes back to buzzwords, right? Like adoption, engagement, bottom line. These are all things that people love to, use and throw out as metrics, but like get one level deeper. What does that actually mean? What does adoption actually mean? What does engagement actually mean? I think drilling down into those deeper metrics is really important, because you'll understand exactly what you're trying to do.
Amazing. And you hit a buzzword that we at the center have been trying to unpack. How do you define engagement? And
it's a tough one, right? I think, like you said, is it repeat customers? Is it people who keep on coming back for more? Is it people or is it a small group of people who are very engaged? I think there's so many definitions for engagement, but really depends on exactly what you're trying to take out.
I love that. Yes, it's too broad of a term, right? Is it, do they look at it for 10 seconds, 2 hours, right?
Right.
Well, awesome. We're about to transition into Q&A, so there's some good ones in there that I'll definitely get to, but keep them rolling in, folks. But Vineeta, what's one piece of advice you want our community to take away from your expertise on launching that you've shared so far?
Yeah, I'm going to say 2, because I can't pick just one. I think the first is that your vision might change, and that's okay. I would say embrace it, because it's usually an informed change. It's not coming out of a whim. It's not coming out of an uneducated place. Trust your gut, listen to the folks on the ground, listen to your users. And that's okay if you have to iterate your product or change course a little bit. So don't be afraid to test in that way. And the second one kind of goes hand in hand, which is test early and test often, and always capture voice of customer, always capture feedback. It does wonders. It's completely, reshaped my roadmap many times. And so you really won't know reaction until you take it out. So I would say those 2 things, as long as you remain, agile and flexible, you'll be okay.
That's great advice. And I have heard many times Products and or markets may change, but the founder and their passion for solving that problem typically doesn't, at least with this.
There you go. Roll with the punches.
All right, well, we're jumping into Q&A. So as I mentioned, they're flooding in, so we'll try to get to all of them, hopefully. So question here, and I think this is from earlier in the discussion, but can you please share the X and Y axis factors that will definitely help us on checking where do we fall ourselves in the market? So you mentioned the grid. I think they're asking for what's your X and Y.
Yeah, I mean, that could vary. It could be cost and it could be speed. It could be convenience, and it could be, you know, like coverage, for example. So it could really vary on, you know, depending on what your product or service is, but it really is, what are the two things that you are trying to position yourself as your strongest value points, as your strongest selling points. Usually, you know, when you're releasing something or you're building something, you have one very clear vision in mind, which is, this software is too expensive. I want to release one that's cheaper, or this software doesn't have enough reach. I want one that will be able to reach these founders. So I think when you have that in your head, you're able to kind of plot those two things against each other. So I don't think they're defined always, but they might be, you know, flexible based on where you see yourself going.
Super helpful. And also, they were curious if you have any suggestions for LinkedIn, Facebook groups, or B2B groups in New York. But I think in general for more content like this.
Yeah, well, my LinkedIn, I think, is linked out in the event, but feel free to definitely tap me. Badassery is the organization that I'm part of, and it's been really wonderful, great network of folks. So you can definitely search Badassery. I don't have as many other B2B specific ones that I'm familiar with intimately, but I'm sure there are a ton out there that there's so many niche markets and communities that I'm sure there's a bunch on LinkedIn.
Oh, I'm sure, yeah. A quick Google. And shout out to Danielle Badassery, who's the reason who, one, is an entrepreneur who went through our Milestone Makers program, but two, is the reason that we're all learning from you today. So Danielle, big shout out to her. And all the
major shout out to Danielle, yep.
All right, so neither myself or other founder have a go-to-market knowledge or experience. If we had a small budget, is it worth it to bring a consultant to talk through our plan?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there is definitely value in bringing someone in who is experienced in the area. I do think the fun of it is crafting it yourself, though. So I think there's a lot to be learned when you take something out to market. There's a lot that you as a founder put into the launch process that an external person may not necessarily be able to do in the same conviction. So I think, you know, if you put the plan together, at least have a bare bones skeleton, it might be worth it to actually bring someone in to gut check you, but you often know yourself what's best for your product or service if you just trust yourself, is what I found.
I think that's terrific advice. And anywhere you can save money, where you can do it yourself, especially in the earlier days.
Yes.
And it's key to be, as you mentioned, the keystone to that learning curve, because you are your number one salesperson, operations person, DevOps.
Mm-hmm. You are a one-man show, so.
Amazing. Tony, not sure if Vineeta can talk about this, but we do have a lot of resources on how early stage founders can raise capital, but they said they've done all of that, and how do we raise? We could pass that one.
Yes, unfortunately, I don't have as much experience in that area. So
okay. Tony, check out our YouTube page. We have a ton of stuff coming up that we've done in the past, and also an event this Friday afternoon that's talking about how you can utilize your connections to raise capital with a VC. So Tony, check that out. Yep, more funding. Is it possible for you to break these terms down for an audience that is not informed? Not sure if I get that questions, but Z Lawrence, if you can give me a little bit of color on that one, that would be awesome. We also have some pre-submitted questions now that we've gotten through these, and please submit your individual questions in the bottom of the screen if you guys still have them live, because I would much rather cover your live questions than some of the pre-submitted ones, but I know that when you submitted them, you still wanted them answered. So hopefully most of these have been answered. So you mentioned your launch checklist and all your spreadsheets. Do you have any example of templates or any ones that you've used that have been useful?
I have one that I use that I'm happy to share out as a skeleton, but it talks to basically these phases, which are planning and prioritization, problem definition, solutioning, feature build, testing, experiment launch, or early testing with a small group of users before scaling out to a full launch, and then the post-launch support, which really is kind of your metrics tracking, your OKR tracking, your iteration on feedback from the product, how can you make it better, and then you just kind of restart that process over again. And those are the high level phases that I've talked through that really are kind of the framework that I follow to a T.
Amazing. And then another question that came in is, we spoke about this the other day, relaunching. So I'm guessing this person either is pivoting or relaunching because the first launch didn't go as planned. So any advice around that?
Yeah, I think we talked about kind of clustering themes together that you were seeing. So in this case, I would really look at what are those themes that you saw emerge in the market when you did launch? Where are the, I guess, the things that didn't work, and why are the things that you're pulling back? Where are the things that were getting lost in translation? What did people not understand? What did people not like about it? Where do they not use it? And so I would kind of look at those and start there. You start with the kind of like the low-hanging fruit almost approach, where you address the biggest and the most prominent problems to fix short term, take that out, see if it's helped, and keep on pulling back and iterating. I think you start with those like big rocks that will move the needle the most before you jump into some of the nitty gritty.
That's great advice. And Z came back, I think is saying, can we break it down, because they are not super, we are using terminology that I believe they don't understand. And Z, my advice is there's tons of resources around this on our YouTube, and it's a little less startup-y. We've got a ton of resources for small businesses as well. So apologies that we're learning from somebody who's a little tech heavy, but never fear, we've got a ton of stuff online that's maybe potentially a little bit easier for you to understand. So I hope that helps. Ooh, I love this one, naming. So what's more important, the website or the name?
That's a great question. I have erred on the side of naming something that you can't tell what the product is with the name, right? And that's how most brands are. You can't actually tell what they do with just the name, right? I think in a B2B world, what we've seen work better is being straightforward with the name. So the website should be clear, it should be very descriptive and functional, as opposed to flashy. So I think it depends on who your audience is. I think the B2B world definitely skews towards the side of more functional and informative, versus a B2C world might be a little bit more flashy of what's in the name. I haven't personally tested the B2C side, but that's my hypothesis and definitely what I've seen in my experiences. I do think a clean website goes a long way, though. I think it's all about how user friendly it is and how your messaging comes across. Again, it kind of goes back to the, can someone understand what you're trying to do in 2 minutes or less? I've gone to so many websites where reading their about me, reading their title pages, I have no idea what that service is still. And I give up because I'm like, I'll find something else. So I do think that the messaging should be very clear, no matter what you name it.
Got it. And there's tons of books out there, and we've hosted authors out there on how to not name your startup. I think the new hot item is using Z's in words, but I'm not an expert there. I've just been seeing a lot of Z's in startup names recently.
Oh, I haven't noticed that.
Could be an SEO thing because not a lot of people use it, but again, not an expert there.
It also helps you kind of tweak the spelling a little bit, right? Substitutions.
Yep. So this is something that I think you've had direct experience, but when refining B2B go-to-market strategies and there's decision makers above you who are gatekeepers, what do you have for the people who are trying to get feedback and buy-in from leadership when launching a process?
Yeah. Leadership tends to typically think about how you're directly driving your OKRs, right? They care about the bottom line. And we kind of talk about the bottom line means different things in different contexts, but they care about how you're driving the needle, whatever that needle is. So I think, like I said, data should tell your whole story. It can do wonders in kind of providing that narrative for you. So even if you're not sure what your narrative is, the data usually plots out in a way where you're able to provide a clear, linear tail or proof that you're moving your OKRs. So I would rely on data as definitely your primary force there. And then the second is what exactly is the product doing for that audience? For leadership, it might be, hey, we're going to get 20% more customers with this. And this is why I think it's important. And this is how I'm planning on doing it. It might be, hey, I'm going to make the company, $1 million, and this is how I plan on doing it. So I think, the main takeaway there is show them the bottom line impact and show them how you're going to do it. I think it's easier to gain buy-in on the approach than it is on the concept. Once you've presented the approach, I don't think it's harder for people to poke holes in it when you've already kind of answered half the questions that you anticipated they would ask. If that makes sense.
Makes total sense. And we're out of time, but I'm so appreciative of your time and everyone who has joined us this afternoon and evening, depending on where you are. So Vineeta, thank you so much for taking the time just to share some of your expertise with our community and just set a great overview for those who are looking to do all of the things that involve a successful product launch. So on behalf of everybody on our team and everyone in attendance, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was really great to be here and share some of this with you.
Great. And for those of you still on with us, we'd love to hear your feedback. So please fill out that survey at the bottom of the screen. As mentioned, we've got some great webinars coming up. We've got growth marketing with Vineeta's counterpart, Grace, on Thursday. And also we've got that event, Tony, that I hope if you're still on that you will join. It's how to create connections that lead to opportunities with a panel that has raised money and that deploys money as a venture capitalist. So thank you all for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you back online with us soon. Till next time.